welcome to today's Planter Session webinar, The M Word, talking about money at churches. And this is brought to you again by us at Geneva Push. My name's Ben McKecken. I'm going to be your moderator today. Now, throughout the webinar, we encourage you very strongly to interact with our speakers. You can do that by typing in questions using the question pane on your GoToWebinar control panel. We're going to be answering your questions live straight after the initial discussion. So please get your questions in early. Now, also, we're recording today's session, and we're going to send you a link to the video and the audio via email within the next few days, so keep an eye out for that. And now, before we get underway, just want to quickly thank our fantastic sponsors who make these webinars possible. Christian Super, they're one of the driving forces behind Geneva Push's Planter Sessions. If you haven't arranged superannuation for your church plant yet, we strongly recommend that you start with a chat to Christian Super. Go to christiansuper.com.au. We also want to thank EA Insurance for getting behind the Planter Sessions. If you've not sorted out the insurance side of church planting yet, then we recommend that you get in touch with EA as quick as you can. Go to ea.org.au. Now, on to the main event. I'm going to hand over to our host today, Al Stewart. Al is one of the directors of Geneva Push. Al, welcome aboard. I'm going to get you to introduce our special guest and get this conversation started. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Ben. Well, it's a great pleasure to have our two guests with us today, two old friends, Rod Irvine and Stuart Starr. Now, in case you don't know Rod and Stuart, let me do some introductions. I have a little bio here about Rod Irvine. Here we go. Now, for 20 years, Rod was a senior minister at Figtree Anglican Church in Wollongong, which is just about an hour or so south of Sydney if you're from interstate. To further his leadership and help address the increasing organisational complexity of the church, Rod completed an MBA at the University of Wollongong, and as I know him, really went and learned from many, many different people. I'm going to share some of that learning with us today. Rod's been married to Helen since 1971, and I have adult children, and I need to update this bio. It says 8, but I'm told now 9 grandchildren. Rod is retired and living in Brisbane, where I suspect he does a very poor job of being retired. He's busy researching leadership, his favourite subject, mentoring and writing. So, Rod, great to have you with us, mate.
Terrific. Thanks to be here. Terrific to be here, Al. Good to catch up with you again too. And Stuart.
Okay. Now, mate, we'll introduce Stuart in just a moment. Let me just, let me be shameless. You've written a book about raising finances in the local church, about fundraising, called Giving Generously. We'll tell later on how people can get this. I've had a look through it. It's brilliant. What you've done is really distill years and years of learning and studying the scriptures and methods and so on, and put it into this one book. Can you give us a quick summary of what the book's about?
Well, yeah, it really is about my journey in generosity to a certain extent. When I went into ministry, like most ministers, you can get some really good stuff at theological college, and like you, went to a great theological college, but you come out and you're sort of tossed into the deep end in a parish, and I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, and just stumbled around for the best part of 10 years. And when I had a financial problem, it was sort of more like, we'll run out of money, help, and or, you know, give us a hand or else we're going to die, that sort of thing. It was just a desperation stakes. I did a bit of a church crawl in the United States, and you get a lot of things over there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are indifferent, but I learned some good stuff. But it was very American, so I brought it back, sort of revitalized it, and then tried to adapt it, and people responded pretty generously at Figtree. They were really great. The offertories rose. We raised money for buildings and things like that, and a range of special projects, missions. And so people kept sort of saying to me, you know, how did you do all this? And so finally I would tell people, and then finally when I retired, I had the time to put it down into a book. So, I mean, in the book, it talks about really the 4 foundational principles of raising money. It talks about the theology of raising money. It talks about raising money for local church projects. It talks about raising money for ongoing ministry. It talks about raising money for big buildings. And also, I think for church planters, it would be good. You know, you often need to go to somebody who's got serious money. They call them deep pocket donors or something like that, and say, you know, we'd really like you to give me $2 million. Well, I had no idea how to do that. I used to listen to you, actually, and how you used to do it, and I thought, well, that's good, and that's a start. So I then went away and researched a bit more and put in the book.
Okay.
So that's
what I like
about it. Very practical.
Right. Now, what I like about it is what you call it fundraising. It's not, the book's not really about fundraising, it's about faith raising, because money is a measure of people's faith and how much they've bought into the gospel vision of what you're doing.
It's not a mechanical program. If you don't love God and you don't want to preach the gospel and you don't want to inspire people from the gospel to give, you're not going to get anywhere. It's just like going out to a local fundraiser, and you might get a bit and you might not, but you're not going to grow people. You get money because you grow people and you cast vision.
Yeah, that's right. And funds are really a means to an end to do that, doing it the way. So
it's a byproduct.
Now, let me say, we really do want people to read this. This has been, if you, here we go, just be shameless, we're talking about fundraising. If you email Rod, you can write this down and we'll kick it out to you on Rod Irvine with two RODDIRVINE, Rod Irvine, 2 Ds, at gmail.com, and Rod will be able to get one of these to you. Following these directions, Rod will send you your money back. Let's move on, and now we'll come back to a lot of these. I'd just like to introduce Stuart Starr with 2 R's. Stuart's married to Caroline, 2 children, and for the past 3 years, he's been the founding pastor at New Life Anglican Church in Oran Park, west of Sydney, working with his associate Matthew Payne. The church started with 2 pastors and wives in the living room. In fact, I remember, Stuart, to be 6 or 7 years ago now, I stood on the patch of dirt that has now been, your church has been built on, and looked out over the empty subdivisions of what they're going to be a town jumping up out of the ground. Now, a lot of hard work later, things are happening. So welcome, mate. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
We've got a few pictures of you and Caroline. Now, where's that one taken? Ben, can we get that? Yeah, there we are. Where was this one taken, mate?
Yes, this was actually taken at our first Geneva Push conference, which at the time was called In the Shoot. And it's down in Melbourne at the end of 2011. And the reason that Karen and I are looking so happy is we like the fact that we're starting church planning, but we've got no idea what we're doing. And we figure that at this conference we're going to find out all the secrets to how to do it properly. So that's us in 2011.
All right. Very good. And then there's one of you and your minister, Matthew Payne, and then you meeting the school now. If I asked you 3.5 years in 3.5 sentences, what jumps out? As you think back over those 3 years, what have you learned, or what's grabbed you about seeing this happen?
Yeah, I think, well, firstly, you just have to give thanks to God for anything that grows, because it's He gives the grace. So very thankful for that. I'm also thankful for ordinary, regular garden variety Australian Christians who have got on board with us sacrificially in a way that I think has surprised me. People have really bought into the vision, and the second family to join us sold their house and moved into Oran Park to be part of the church. And so a couple like that, we're just blown away at the level that people have bought into what we're doing and have decided to join us at this journey, being all in, which has just been absolutely fantastic. So thankful to God, and also, I guess, learning patience as seeds of relationship and stuff that we've sown are now starting to bear fruit. And so that's a real joy. So a couple I met on the first day I was in Oran Park, playing cricket on a block of land that's now a house. He and his wife, Catholic background, came into church last weekend, and they said, you know, we just wanted to come and visit. We just felt we should come. And I spoke to his wife this week, just past, and he was at work, and she said, my kids just loved it so much, I thought I had to come back. And I'm just so excited about that, but also remembering that it just takes time, you know. So there's some things I've been learning.
Yeah, fantastic. That's three that relationship. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Okay, let's get down to business, and let me ask Rod a question. Rod, why is it you think that you know, ministers, pastors can, you know, we talk about so many different subjects, but it's hard for us, hard for ministers to talk about money. Why generally does that seem the case?
I think part of the reason is, at a profound level, we're not trained for it, and I'm not blaming anybody for that. I'm just simply saying there's a lot to learn in ministry, and people have got to learn their basic theology, and then they've got to learn some basic pastoral skills, and then they come out into some sort of church, and there's a whole range of leadership, organisational skills that come with actually running a church, and that just sometimes gets missed out, and people hope that you pick it all up. So firstly, there's just generally not trained to do it. Then you get in there and you don't know how to do it, so you don't really want to offend people. You don't know if you talk about money, will people leave? You've heard about wacky TV preachers that have given the gospel a bad name because they keep on asking for money. So you don't quite know how to do it, and people really don't quite understand that money is the byproduct of other things. So you've got to, as you said, you've got to preach faith, you've got to preach generosity, and you've got to preach vision, and then you've got to ask on the basis of that. But what often happens is that people have got this idea that somehow it's about money. I mean, so many times I've talked to people and they've said, oh, Rod, you're going to, you've written a book. I want to get my treasurer to read this. Well, I hope every treasurer reads it, but the treasurer is not the guy who primarily needs to read it. It's the senior minister who needs to read it and embrace it and understand it. Once people start to think, I get my treasurer to read it, they're tossing it over.
Wait a minute, though. Let me throw you a Dorothy Dixer if I can, okay?
It's not in the script,
no, here we are. This is a full toss for you. Don't you hand it to your church wardens or deacons or elders? Isn't it their job to raise the money, and the senior minister's job is just to understand theology and teach the Bible? Isn't that the way it should work, Rod? He throws the full top.
Well, that's the way ministers would like it to work, but fundamentally people have got to realise that treasurers and elders and wardens count money, they never raise money. So if the church ever has a problem, by and large, unless you've got somebody, you know, and there might be some glorious exceptions, if you've got a money problem in the church, your eldership will generally try and cut costs. That's their default position, and I can't blame them because they don't know any difference. So basically, the elders and treasurers and that need to be on board, and by jingoes, they should read the book, and I hope they do all read the book. You know, I hope people buy, you know, a dozen copies for them. But the senior minister is the chief preacher, leader, and vision raiser and faith raiser. And if he doesn't do it, then really it doesn't happen. You know, the eldership can make, you know, all the nice noises in the world, but it's the senior minister who gets up there and who's got the pulpit and can expound the gospel to them and then say, come on, lads, let's get on board. We need to give to this. So it really is a major leadership issue about, and if ministers don't try to dodge it, really they're fooling themselves.
So your elders might count the money, but it's your senior pastor, your senior minister who's got to raise the money because money follows vision, I think I've heard you say. Is that right?
That's right. But money follows vision, yeah. And I don't want the elders and the treasurer to be excluded from it. In fact, the best possible way is for the senior minister and the elders to read the book together, so they support him when he gets up, because they also will be scared that if the minister talks about money, then people will leave the church. So they've got all this, there's all of these negative stereotypes out there about how to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that really is, that's really the thing.
Okay. Do you want to just walk us through some of the key things? Now that's kind of a whole mind shift for some of us in terms of people in ministry about your responsibility. Do you want to just walk us through some of the key things that you've learned or over the years or put into your book about, I've talked to you in the past about commitment days or different, what if you got to raise money for a building versus raise money to pay wages week by week? Are they in the same bucket, the same method? Give us some of the principles that you've worked out.
Well, just to backtrack just slightly and to recap, there are 4 fundamental principles. And the first one is the senior minister is the main resource raiser. They've got to get that absolutely clear. Paul did it, David did it, even our Lord Jesus had ladies who actually supported him. We don't know exactly how he got that, but everybody was involved in it. So that's the first one. Money follows vision. There's 2 types of churches. There's pay the bills or live the vision. And most churches are pay the bills. It's got to be live the vision. Thirdly, you've got to be able to focus on generosity as much as money. Because generosity is a noble term. Then you've got to have a gracious way to ask. The basis for raising money in churches is to ask for it. You've just got to ask for it in a nice, gracious way, a positive way, a bold way, but a gracious way. And when you do that, people don't leave, they just get excited. And the extra thing is, and I talk a bit more about this in the book, you've really got to learn how to preach on it. And the more you start doing it, the easier it gets, because the Bible is absolutely flooded with verses and scriptures about money. So you can preach on money or generosity from pretty much any book in the Bible. It's there everywhere, and the more you look for it, the more you find it. Because I think that Jesus knows that the thing that, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So, the key principles that you were talking about is every year we had a commitment day where people signed a commitment card, and they indicated what money they were going to give to the church the next year. We also had a special offering to support special projects at the same time. We always had 6 of them, because people like to give to what they like to give for. And so, for instance, you try and generally have a range of projects open for people to give, and ask people to give to at least one of them. Because the person who wants to give to mission may not give to maintenance. And sometimes maintenance is just necessary. Mission's necessary too, but you can bang a drum and say, look, I won't have a maintenance project this year because we've got a mission project. Well, that's faulty thinking, because the person who will give to mission probably won't give to maintenance anyway, and vice versa. So we had 6 projects open. Pretty much always there was a mission project, but always there was a children's project. Now, people love giving to children's ministry. So that was what we asked for. The next thing was, there are generally 2 types of resource raising that we did. One was for the ongoing weekly offering and small projects that I've just been talking about. But secondly, sometimes you've got to pull out all the stops and go for a building project. And sometimes, we're talking about something that's a major capital work that could be, of the order of 3 or 4 or 5 or even 6 times the annual income of the church. How do people put up a big building or an extension or a big youth hall or something like that? So they're the 2 sorts of things. They're interrelated. One is just more intense than the other. Next key principle, I think, is that it applies to big churches, small churches, country churches, city churches, startup churches, because they're principles. They're not specifically targeted. Yeah, you might have to vary exactly what you do in a different place, but because they're generally biblical principles, and they're not just restricted to, say, Stewart's church or my church or a small church. In fact, the guy that I learnt this stuff from in the States he started off with a church in rural America, and it was about 3 people in it. So it works there, and it works in the big church as well. I also say it's actually pretty much essential to get people to sign the cards. Don't just wimp out on asking them not to sign the cards, because when they're signing the cards, they're making a commitment, and people tend to live with commitments. I do, and also it really is saying this is not a money issue, it's a faith issue, because I got to see them. Now, I didn't do hugely amount, but in principle it's saying this is about your relationship with God as much as it is about money. Because again, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And if I can in principle know about their prayer life or their marriage life or whatever it is, their money life is even more important than that, according to Jesus. So why do I want to exclude that? Normally, we had the endorsement of the board and the staff. Very important not to move to move without them. I used to always announce my own amount. The board and staff, we announced their collective amount. Now, this was taken from 1 Chronicles 29, where David gave, where the elders gave, and then the people rejoiced. So I always stood up before the congregation and I told them exactly what I gave. It was scary. I don't do it anymore because I'm not the senior minister. The week before, I'd collected the commitment cards from the staff and the parish council, and then I gave out their collective amount. And I would always say, we do this because we are not asking you to do anything that we are not prepared to do ourselves. Yep. When Stewart was on staff, he had to hand his card in, didn't you, Stewart?
True, correct.
I want $1 million a week from you, Stewart, out of your pay, that sort of thing.
And I said it was generous of you to pay me $2 million, Rod, so I could spare
exactly.
it. No.
Exactly. You were worth it, Stewart. The other thing is it's important to plan in advance. We used to do this in November. I would actually start thinking about it in April. I've had people say, oh, look, I'm a bit down on money. I heard of you do a commitment series. I'd like to do one in 3 weeks' time. Well, it just takes preparation. It takes prayer. And it just takes organisation to get done. You've got to preach better sermons than you've normally done. You've got to prepare a range of activities, brochures, videos, advanced planning. So don't think you can do it in the last 5 minutes. So yeah, they would be some of the main things.
Okay. Well, my guess is there's a whole lot of things. Signing cards, people putting their names on it, announcing how much you've given, planning in advance, building. There's 100 things. We've got a question time coming up. I've got some questions for you. Let's leave that, Rod, and we'll come back to it. What if I could is hear from Stewart. Mate, one of the good things about, by the way, I don't think I mentioned that Stewart and Rod worked together in Figtree for how many years, guys?
I worked together for 3 years, I think.
Okay,
before
and
Rod
Stewart was, you were particularly the event.
Stewart was a bright young guy that we brought on because I was getting into my dotage, and we felt we just needed to freshen the place up with a new mind and a fresh vitality, and that's what Stewart brought to us.
Yeah, I'd say stick to the money, Rod.
Stewart was the evangelism pastor at Figtree Church, weren't you?
Yeah, that's
particularly concerned for event. Okay, now, mate, one of the great things about church planting is you start with a clean slate, and people have no real, they shouldn't have expectations about what will happen.
Everyone
what have you put in? Sorry, yes, that's right. You were there first, I guess, so you get to set right. What happens. That's the advantage. What have you put into practice? Some of these principles at New Life. What have you done in the 3 years that, as you've begun to get people thinking in the right track about gospel, faith, generosity, money, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is I had the privilege, before there was a book, of sitting under Rod for 3 years, and he was very generous in bringing me up to speed with the principles, and also got to watch it firsthand. So if you're listening today and your first reaction to hearing some of the things that Rod said is, oh, I don't think that's right, all I'd say is just slow down. and have a chance to have a listen to him. It's very well thought out. And on top of that, I had the ability to sit there and watch Rod do it with humility and care and theological precision. And so I just encourage people who their first take is, oh, that all doesn't sound. Just slow down, have a read. Here's some things that I picked up though, Al. I think they'll come up on the slide.
Stuart, I should say, people can. Sorry, let me interrupt. People can ask questions. Dial them in now, and in 5 or 10 minutes we'll get to answering questions. Sorry to interrupt. Go for it, Stuart. Great. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so some things that I learned. The first thing I learned is, I think it'll come up on the slides here. Belief. I actually think behind all of this, we're going to talk very pragmatically today, although Rod's been careful to speak about the theology. I actually think you have to believe yourself as the pastor, believe yourself that people can't serve God and money, and that you actually need to be talking about money with your people because it's killing them. And if you don't share that conviction that fundamentally is a spiritual pastoral issue at stake for your people, then you're doing something pragmatically to make sure that you get paid, and that's not a bad thing per se. But if you skip straight to the pragmatics and miss the spiritual reality that money and dependence on money is killing your people, then I think you're fundamentally missing the reason that it's good to talk about it in the first place. Even if it wasn't to pay your bill, as a pastor caring for your people, you should be talking to them about money. And so I think the first behind everything else is, do you have that belief, that conviction that there's a spiritual reality that, to use Mark Driscoll's turn of phrase, if we can still do that today, money is a functional savior. Money is a functional savior for a bunch of our people, and we must be talking about it because it's killing them. So that's the first thing. Second thing, with the vision, I saw Rod do this. You have to be all in yourself. Do you actually believe in what you're telling people you're here for? And would you go to the church that you're leading if you weren't leading it? All that sort of stuff. Have you got a clarity, a clear picture on what your preferred outcome of the future is? Why are we here? What are we trying to do? And if you can't get that across to people concisely and personally, then honestly, the rest of it is going to be a real hard graft. So belief first, vision second. Clarity, I think you need to tell people what's at stake. So you need to do that in the spiritual perspective. What are we here for? There's kingdom outcomes. And secondly, there's a financial reality. So, we try and be very clear on what's actually at stake. The fourth point I got there is transparency. So it's not hiding for people what's going on, and not just bringing it up also when everything's falling apart. So I had a meeting where we cast the vision very passionately about what 2015 was about, and then I laid out a line that said, here's where our finances fall through the floor and we run out of money in September next year. What that means is I don't get paid, Matt doesn't get paid. That's what happens if nothing changes here. Now, we believe that what's going on here is for the advancement of the kingdom. So we're saying to people, here's what it looks like. Here's the difference practically that you can make. So that transparency. Then the leadership thing, Rod's already spoken about it. I said under him, so I'm just going to echo back things that I heard from him. I think you have to be giving yourself. And what that means for me is my family tithes to our church. You might think that's completely circular, but I tell you what, there's plenty going on, and I've got a guy who's working with me, and so I want to make sure he gets paid. So I tithe to the church myself. The next point there is then just trust, which is that over time, people have to believe that when you say something about vision under God, something happens. And over time, if you keep doing that, and I watched Rod do that, for my 3 years there, but he had a track record of years and years before that. People knew that it wasn't just a bunch of hot air when you talked vision, that you have under God delivered again and again and again. Trust and vision will go together, and that will enable people to give joyfully because they've seen that this is a place where things can make a difference. So that'd be some of the things that I learned.
Okay. Is there anything, now you've done that, is there anything kind of particular that a lot of the people who are listening involved in church planting, anything particular you need to get right in those first couple of years? I mean, I get your belief, vision, clarity applies to everyone. Anything particularly in those first couple of years when things are really small?
I think just saying, I mean, I have great joy doing this when we have our, we have a partnership course that we run where we ask people who are, who've been coming along to our church for a while to step up. I know many of you guys who are listening will have a similar thing. And in that, I always lead the money discussion. And I have joy in doing it. I say to people, is anyone here feeling awkward that the senior minister is talking to you about money? Because I'm not feeling awkward. I'm actually loving the opportunity to talk to you about money because your money's killing you, because we have a great need here, and because there's a spiritual opportunity. And I want to invite you to partner with us. And I actually say to people, if you're not willing to give, we talk about three things: your time, your talents, and your treasure. If you're not willing to give your time, your talents, and treasure to this church, here's what I'd say. The world is full of churches. Go find a church where you can joyfully give your time, your talents, and your treasure because you believe in what they're doing so much. You just can't help it. And so we said right from the start, if this isn't rocking your world, that's okay. It doesn't have to, but we'd encourage you to find a place where it does. And if you're here, be all in with us across those three areas.
Okay. Now that's at a members meeting. You wouldn't do that in a general Sunday thing where you've got visitors, people who aren't Christian there.
Yeah, we're weird, Al. So I don't tell people you have to do this. My conviction has been we don't take up a collection in church, and we don't talk about money other than when it comes up in our exegetical preaching or for a commitment series. We don't talk about that at all in public. And part of the reason for that is I think Australians are cynical that the church wants money from them. That's number one. And so I just want to take that out of the equation. We tell people you'll be our guest until you are our partner. And if you're our partner, we want you to step up. The second thing I say is I don't want to give Christians an opportunity to alleviate their guilt. And what I mean by that is as the bag goes around, you can pull out the second biggest note in your wallet and feel that you've contributed. And I want to remove the opportunity for people to stop feeling guilty that they haven't given anything until they decide they really want to give stuff. So we say, you're our guest until you're our partner. And if you're our partner, we want you to, I say to people straight away, I say, your spare change isn't going to fund our ministry.
That's true. That's true.
And so then
yep, go on.
I was going to say, so then in order to actually enable stuff to happen once we have a discussion in the partnership course, we've got a form that we use. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but
I think the form's going to come up. We've got a slide of that. Yeah, keep going, mate. So we have time, talent, treasure. Is it the time, talent, treasure form?
That's it. Yeah. So basically, what we do is we say to people, we want you to be all in, time, talent, and treasure. And the problem is often what we want is fill in a form that's just about money, right? Which ends up seeming like we're actually not interested in the other things. The things we're really interested in is your money. And so we say, tell us how's the kingdom of God shaping your time? What are you doing in your week where you're being an ambassador for Jesus, right? How's the kingdom of God shaping your talents? What talents do you have as a family that you can put at the disposal of the church that we might be able to draw on? Just write them down. And then we have down the bottom here, how's the kingdom of God shaping our treasure? And now my reflection is, if we're going to have people seriously give money, there has to be a serious husband and wife discussion that happens. And I think at some level, the failure to facilitate that is actually a massive oversight in a whole part of our giving. So I wanted to think, how do I help husbands and wives who are faithful think about doing this well? So we have the bottom part of this form here. And I actually set up the discussion saying that there's a guide in the Old Testament that people gave 10%. There's a given in the New Testament that you support gospel workers. And there's a goal in the New Testament that we grow in Christian generosity. Under that, and I teach that out, but underneath that, I say, write down your income sources. You can see there on the screen, income source 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe people have got more. Write down that total in the blue box there. Carry that across to the other side and write the total down. And then just stare down right in that box there. What's 10% of that? And I just reckon that'll be a blood-chilling moment for people, but I want them to stare that down, right? And then say, well, what's our current giving? Orange box there. Ooh, that's different, isn't it? Okay, so there's 10%. Here's what we're currently giving. And then I say, well, what's your generous goal? So how could your family, together, husband and wife, prayerfully, what could we move towards? And then what will we give? You see the little blue arrow goes up to the top there? Put that in there and say, this is what we are going to give. Put it into your direct debit, lock it in, take it out of the equation, and just give it. you'll notice that there's a dotted line under that top blue box. The idea is you rip that off. I don't need to see anyone's working, but I want to help them do the hard work of actually adding it up, dividing it out, and then saying what they're going to give. And we've found that that's been really helpful for a bunch of our people here.
Mm-hmm. Do you find, this isn't scripted, do you find that 20% of your people give 80% of your money?
We're trying to make sure at the moment that every one of our partners is growing in Christian generosity. So I actually say to our people, so it probably is somewhere like that at the moment, mate. What I've said to people is, I'm in mortgage land here, as everyone probably is, but brand new houses, right? So 2 workers, people sending kids to private school and whatever. I say to people, you may never have met this teaching before. We want you to start giving something today, but we're going to ask you each year to grow in Christian generosity. So my answer to that would be, at the moment, yeah, that's probably right, Al, but I'm actually looking to have every single one of those people grow every year in Christian generosity, and I'm not making them feel guilty about that, because some of them have got so many things locked into their lives at the moment. If I ask them to give 10% tomorrow, they actually can't. And I'm saying, well, that's not ideal. Yeah, so I'm saying that's not ideal.
That's the goal at the end, after a few years, to get to that. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
But to give people the space to do that, rather than loading them up with guilt, where they've made, I think, along the line, probably a whole bunch of unwise choices, give them some space to untangle that and to put kingdom priorities in place.
Yeah. As a society, we get richer and richer and get ourselves into more and more debt. We just live right up to. Okay. Now, folks, for those listening, more than happy for you to send your questions through to Ben, and we'll take them. We've got 20, 25 minutes, something like that left. Rod, the question I'd like to ask you, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, and isn't giving between you and God, not you and Rod. So what about, you like that? I just thought of that. People signing pledge cards with names. Did you get pushback on that? Why would you do that? Can you just elaborate on why you would do that when many people would say Jesus says giving needs to be anonymous? Please.
Well, just before I do that, just let me say I was blown away by Stuart's stuff there. I was just so excited that that a guy that could come and learn under me could not only learn, but just take it so far more than I actually taught him. So I'm just impressed, Stuart. It's great. I got excited just listening to it. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's context, Al. There, you've got 1 Chronicles 29 where David acts as the leader. You've got Matthew 6 where Jesus is talking to Pharisees who were trying to not act as leaders. They were trying to actually say, look at me, look how pious I am. So I give more than other people. I pray more than other people. I fast more than other people. Look at me, look at me, look at me. And so Jesus kicks down that attitude. So the contexts are entirely different. But secondly, if you don't take the context into account, you'd never actually go to a prayer meeting, because Jesus says, go away, go and pray in your closet. Now, we don't have any problem, but particularly in the Anglican Church, we have a book of common prayer. But we all go to prayer meetings and Bible study groups, and we pray together. And when we pray together, or when a minister leads prayers or anybody leads prayers, 9 times out of 10, they're not doing it so you can see how great a prayer they are. So I just think to use that, that verse in Matthew 6 to exclude this is really trying to just misunderstand the whole context of what Jesus is saying and take a verse in isolation. Because when you go to David says, I gave out of the royal treasury this amount, and I'm putting my hand up myself and the exact amount. So it's a leadership function. And I used to say to the congregation in Figtree, I'm only doing this because I'm the leader. The day I stop being the leader is the day I stop doing it. The day I start liking doing it will be the day I stop doing it. And so I used to have to pray every year that I could get up the courage to go and do it again, because it wasn't a thrilling thing for me to do. And now I'm a regular member of a congregation. I just go back and do what I always did.
Hey, Al, can I jump in there? As someone who was sitting in the congregation when Rod did that, it was done with humility, which I was always grateful for, but it was also done in reality. So I was able to see, hey, Rod and Helen are seriously in on this thing that they're calling us to do, and I actually found that profoundly motivating. So yeah, I never saw Rod big noting himself about it, ever. And I got the profound sense that he was doing it in some way, hesitatingly in doing it. But at the same time, I sat there and went, well, Carol and I better get our stuff together because Rod and Helen have. And I actually, that was really encouraging, rather than I looked up and went, well, isn't he just blowing wind up himself?
Blowing his own trumpet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me read a question. And now, I guess question for either of you gentlemen from Andy. If you ask people to sign off on an annual pledge, how do you prevent it from sounding like they're being compelled to give? Isn't a pledge going against the idea of a free will offering? Isn't the idea of an annual pledge going against a free will offering?
I don't think so at all. So my response would be, well, here's two things we do. So I say to people, why don't you get your tithes sorted out and locked away because it's a way to honour God. Just get it done. And I say to people, once you have that 10% going out, direct debit, you just live on what's left, okay? And so profoundly, I never feel that there's an issue. I get that done as a matter of faithfulness and just get rid of it. And then I say, now grow in the grace of Christian generosity. You can give anywhere you want. You can give more to the church. You can give beyond the church. You can do whatever you want. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you be faithful at the starting point. And if you want to grow in the grace of Christian generosity all over the place, I'm not asking any obligation for that whatsoever. Go for goal. I'm trying to help you be faithful. So I'd say, isn't it constraining giving generously? Not at all. I think we're helping facilitate that for a bunch of people who, on the whole, aren't really brilliant at it.
Okay. Are you saying too that you, Rod, go on?
I think what Stuart said before, he wanted to facilitate, going back a little, he wanted to facilitate a conversation between husbands and wives on this issue. So you're giving people the opportunity basically at the start of an annual period to sit down, to talk, to pray, even to discuss it with the kids, and then say, we will commit to this. Now, that's where their free will part comes in.
Absolutely.
I always said to people, if the sky falls in and you lose your job, you haven't signed this in blood, but you're just basically saying, this is under God what I really, really, really want to commit to this year. And now there'll be other people who'll get a raise. And I used to say, if you get a raise during the year, you might want to put it up. So it balances itself out, but we didn't have a problem at that level.
Okay. Another question from Mark. Either one of you can answer this one. I noticed that Stewart uses a total income figure that suggests it's before tax. Is that reasonable? 10% is a good indicator, but should you really be asking them to calculate it on the basis of money they never see? Isn't that more likely to make the level of generosity you're assuming seem less and less attainable? I guess that's the question. Are you tithing before tax or after tax, Stuart?
I just like to look at the number and divide it by 10. I don't care what people do, honestly, Al. And if it's going to cause someone to hang up or disengage with the process, do it after tax. Honestly, I think it's neither here nor there. Here's the thing. Are you interested in honouring God with your money? Figure it out with God. I think this is a helpful structure. I'm happy to look at the total amount that comes to me. If the government takes part of that money, then it had to be given to me to be given to them in the first place. Why don't I give some of it to God? If that's going to drive anyone into poverty, if it's going to cause them to stop being generous, no problems. You're absolutely free. There is no obligation here at all. And so if the before tax thing hangs anyone up, I'd say hop off. Don't do that. Do it with whatever you got. But here's the thing. Is the first reason we're asking that because we want to find a more comfortable way to deal with generosity? Well, you work that out at your end.
Yeah. The last time I did the stats on a particular denomination, which will remain nameless, the average member of that denomination was tithing unemployment benefits. So there probably is a little margin for growth there. Anyway, any other thoughts on that, Rod?
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally with Stuart. I never tried to, you can't argue people into that, but the fundamental issue with tithing is you pay God first. Now, the fact is the government gets your money first. That's just the way in which our tax structure is taken on board. And so the idea that we get a certain amount of money in our hand, in one sense, is irrelevant. And I totally understand Stuart's point of view, and I wouldn't necessarily want to box people into a corner. But I just would want to point out to them that your money, God gets the first of your money. Why does the government get it? And if people ever wanted to become nitpicky, I'd just smile and say, which way allows you to be more generous? Because our issue here is not the actual 10%. It's the generous heart. And I used to try and teach people that it starts after the generous heart. So just start to figure it out. Is 10% of your net or your gross more generous? How could, when we're talking about the dollar, we're talking about your heart. And that because a lot of people try and play games with that figure. That sort of thing.
And I think you'd find when people actually get it about gospel giving, it's actually a joy to give. I think someone once said, wasn't it, that it's better to give than receive? It is actually true. Now, another question from Jeremy. Do Rod and Stewart encourage people to think extra generously during tax time when they're possibly going to have access to a lump sum? So, someone's going to give a cheque back from the government, a tax refund or whatever. Have you ever run particular projects, that kind of thing, around people receiving lump sums?
Yeah, we did that at Figtree, I think, Rod, when we had Kevin's money from Kevin. We said money from heaven or something.
Manna from Kevin.
And we asked people to consider, given that it was just falling from the sky, whether they could just throw it in the direction of the church instead of buying a new plasma or something. So I remember that as one instance.
Yeah, I didn't do that. That was my successor, but I thought he was brilliant.
It was, I think, $900, trip to Bali or a television, wasn't it? Rod?
Well, look, we did. I didn't push it, and some churches do their commitment series at the end of the financial year rather than the end of the calendar year for that sort of purpose. But one woman came up to me, one young woman, one day, and she said, you always ought to encourage people at times when they get certain blessings. And we were in a steel town where the steelworks would often pay people bonuses at the end of the year. And I remember her coming up to me and saying, Rod, tell people to tithe out of their bonuses. Because sometimes, and this was pre the GFC, sometimes they were getting huge bonuses. And they were just complete windfalls. She said, but unless you tell people or give people the opportunity and met them, they won't think about it. They got a million and one other things to think about. And what Stewart was saying about the manna from Kevin, it just put into their mind, oh, look, I won't get another plasma TV, maybe I'll give it somewhere else. But they wouldn't have been thought about unless they were asked. And the absolute key to raising money is to ask for it. Those three words, you ask for it. Okay. I thought the manna from Kevin process was brilliant. Wish I'd thought of it.
Okay, we've got 7 minutes left or so. A question from Brad. Both Rod and Stewart, for both of you, how important is it to ask people outside the church family for money, particularly big projects and for a church startup? What principles do you have when you're asking people outside the church?
So we started with 2 staff members, which is completely insane, right? So I had funding for my position, and I spent 6 months praying for someone to come work with me, and Matt, was very generously provided by God as a guy who was finishing college, who'd lived in the area, who was thinking about church planning himself. So we did our theological 20 questions and thought we could work together. And I said, mate, I think this can work. There's only one small problem. I got no money at all. He went, okay, all right. So we said, well, how are we going to do this? So two things that we did. We had a fundraising night for Matt and Mandy, where they drew on the people they'd been involved in ministry with, and I cast the vision and asked for money, and God was extremely generous, and we raised 35 grand on that night, and went, okay, that's an encouragement for us. I did the same thing with a bunch of people who were our prayer supporters, and raised about, I think in the first year it was about 15, I think. And Matt offered to do some part-time working, which is how we kind of got ourselves up and running. He was a qualified teacher and did some casual work. But how important is to ask for people beyond the church? Well, it depends if there is a church. There wasn't a church for us when we started, so we asked beyond it. And we've kept doing that in order to help us keep growing along. We'll grow out of that at some point. And in fact, we asked people outside of the church, we said, we've got a sunset clause for you. So we want you to keep giving. And not just, we don't want to do a fundraiser every year. So we're going to do one this year, and we're going to ask you to commit to your giving to support us for a 3-year period, and then let that sit. So that's what we're asking for you. Be generous, do it for a period of time. It's for this specific purpose, and then there's a sunset clause built in. So I'd say, yeah, sure, ask for people beyond your church for sure.
Someone who's working for a mission organisation in the CBD, let me ask you, are you happy for your people to give outside of your church as well?
Me personally, yeah, absolutely. So what we're trying to do at the moment, and this is all kind of embryonic at the moment, but what we're trying to say, we want to move people towards tied to the church and let your Christian generosity flow wherever it may. And so get your requirement to support your local church and gospel ministers, which I think is a New Testament imperative. Get that sorted out, get your tithing happening, and then go wherever. And we're actually going to be presenting opportunities for people to say, it could be here, could be here, could be here, could be here. We're not trying to take that money in and then redistribute it. We want to encourage you to spread your generosity wide.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Rod?
No, that's right. Obviously, you're not asking non-Christians to support your to support your ministry, but I mean, if they want to throw a bucket of money in, but I'm not, we're not at that level. But obviously, with the church planning situation, you've just simply got to. I mean, in one sense, that's why I've got in the book one of the part of the ways to actually ask an individual person, how to pony up for an enormous amount of money. But I like the business about the sunset clause. We didn't have to ask people outside at Figtree because we had an established congregation, and we did that. I was very interested in the way Stewart did it, and I just agree with it. But I also think if people have missed this, you're trying to encourage generosity all the time, and you use that 10% not as law, but it's the springboard, it's the benchmark. And it's not even that you're telling people if you give over 10%, you're generous. It's just for me, I can never actually figure out if you're giving less than 10%, how you can even fool anybody that you're being generous. Not in our country, not in the richest country in one of the richest times in ever, when Old Testament farmers in the Bible would have starved if their crops failed, and they were being asked to give 10%. So we're trying to say, okay, look, just use the 10% not as a law, but as a benchmark to start thinking now, how can I spring off that to be generous to this church and to other organisations as well?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more. Here we go. Question from Rose. When discussing giving at church, what are the best ways to discuss how financial giving assists or informs the growth of a church? We don't want it to sound like a prosperity gospel message that's being preached. Now, I know you guys have always been very careful to avoid that. You want me to read the question again? What's the best way to explain how financial giving assists the growth of a church? We don't want it to sound like a prosperity gospel is being preached. Either of you gentlemen want to comment?
Well,
okay, Rod.
You guys do it. No, you're right.
I was going to say, in some ways, the answer is almost provided by the question. So long as we're talking about outcomes that are church-directed and not back to the individual, the possibility of it sounding like prosperity gospel is pretty much taken care of. You're giving to see the advancement of the church. There's some ways we can talk about that, but how that would become prosperity if you're talking about in a churchward direction, it seems that's already taken care of. I think when you're saying give to the church and it will go well for you individually and spectacularly, that's obviously when we're in danger. And Rod, you probably got something to say about that.
Yeah, I put a chapter on the so-called prosperity gospel in my book, but yeah, I'll just leave people to read the book to get the chapter. But the other thing is, Stuart's absolutely right. You're asking people to give to the vision, and so you can hold up the vision, and you can hold up the ministries that are going on in that vision. So you can say to people, look, what's going on in this with this is that we want to start a children's ministry, or we want to start a ministry to the poor, or we want to start a men's ministry or women's ministry, or what we want to actually be sending 5 more people on the mission field. And these are the things that are happening because of the generosity. So that's just a rolling thing that's happening every year. So you're highlighting their growth in faith, but also the church's growth in vision and ministry under God. And people get excited about that. And I mean, that's exactly what Paul was doing in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. It was what David was doing in 1 Chronicles 29. And Moses did when he raised money for the tabernacle, or raised material for the tabernacle. They just held up this vision and said, okay, under God, let's get on board. And Paul actually says they gave themselves to the Lord before they gave them to us. So it's this spiritual dynamic that they're giving themselves to God and then to God's work. And so let's give. And so it's a very exciting thing to do, and people grow.
Absolutely.
Okay. One last question. Now, question from John. Rod and Stuart mentioned that people give to vision. What does that mean? What might that look like in particular circumstance of being a church planter? So people give to vision, yes. What can you just break that down for us? What does that?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So our vision at New Life Anglican is to see new life in Jesus come to every home in Oran Park and the growing southwest for their salvation, the good of the community, and the glory of God. So we say to people, we exist so that every home here may know new life in Jesus. We're not there yet. You're partners with us in making that possible. Help us as a staff team to be able to equip you that we might see this thing happen. Now, at that point, what we're not calling to people is, can you help pay the bills? I'd like my wife to be able to feed our children tonight. That's true, but it's not very inspiring, and it doesn't draw them in. So why would I give? I give because I'm on the mission field with you to see this happen, and I'd like to help us get there together by helping you to lead us to get there. So I think the vision, what is vision? It's actually having a clear picture of why we're here and being able to call people and say, don't you longer see every home here know Jesus? If you do, help us. Come help us with your time, your talents, and your treasure.
Yeah, I thought earlier on.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And all I would add to that is that what we would have done was to have something similar to that. We had impacting the region, modelling the nation, sending to the world. But then we would have specific projects or reasons why people should give, tangible, that would actually be those sort of things that Stuart was talking about being incarnated. So, for instance, Stewart himself was a commitment project 1 year because we wanted to hold out the vision of having evangelism done well and having young adults evangelized well. And so we said, we're just going to hire this brilliant young couple. And so we want you to give to that. And that's what happened, you see. So there was the principle that Stuart's talking about. Then there was the specific that they could see in flesh and blood. And we even brought him down and waved him around at a party and things like that so people could actually see Stuart and Carolyn. And that helped too.
Okay. Gentlemen, great chatting with you. This has been gold. Let me just say again, Rod Irvine, giving generously, distilling a whole lot of biblical and just practical wisdom. If you want a copy or to talk with Rod Irvine, but 2 D's, R-O-D-D, Irvine @gmail.com. and you can order the book. I think it's $30 plus postage, or if you buy a whole lot, Rod's got a discount for you. Thank you very much, Rod. Stuart, thank you for being with us. I'll pass back to Ben, who will wrap up the session.
Thank you, Al.
Thanks so much, Al, Stuart. Rod, wow, that was a fantastic discussion, wasn't it? About the M word, about actually talking about money at church. Now, before I sign off for today, I want to point you to our next planner session. You would have been so excited after today. You're going to want to write this down in your diary as soon as you can. The next webinar planner session is on the 8th of July. It's going to be about lessons from mother-daughter church planning. Now, Al's going to be in discussion with Paul Harrington, who's the rector at Holy Trinity Anglican Church in Adelaide, and Clayton Fopp as well, who's a planter of Holy Trinity Mount Barker, which is more like kind of like a granddaughter plant, if you like. Now they're going to be talking about this particular relationship the two churches have, what they've learned, the good, the bad, that kind of thing. You're not going to want to miss it. So that's on the 8th of July from 9:30. If you want to register, go to genevapush.com and register now, because you're not going to want to miss it. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And particularly, thank you to Stuart and Rod for their words of wisdom. Thank you, Al, for hosting us. On behalf of Geneva Push, my name's Ben McKecken. We hope you have a fantastic week.